The wrath of God is consequential, not retributive, meaning that when we go against the grain of love, why is there something instead of nothing? Because God said, let there be. But why does God say, let there be? Because God is love-seeking expression. And so the universe comes into being from a God of love who loves. And this creates this grain within the universe. If we go with the grain of love, it tends towards well-being. It doesn't guarantee that there won't be, I mean, we're all subject to death, but that's something that Christ redeems us from. But if we go with the grain of love, it tends towards well-being. But if we decide, no, I'm not going to love God and I'm not going to love my neighbor, I'm going to go against the grain of love, we inevitably suffer the shards of self-inflicted pain. You can call this the wrath of God. The Bible does. But it's not retributive. It's not actually God personally becoming angry and saying, ah! In fact, the early church fathers were very clear on this, that the wrath of God was a metaphor. They were insistent upon that because they were so deeply committed to the immutability and impassibility of God, that God is not moved through his own passions, and God doesn't change. He doesn't go from being in one state of emotion to another, because that would mean change. And God is immutable. God doesn't mutate. God doesn't change. And so, the Bible talks about God sleeping. The God talks about God, being like a bird with wings. The Bible talks about God being a rock. But we say, okay, these are metaphors. The church fathers would say, yes, and the wrath of God is also a metaphor. Now, it's telling us about something that's very true. And so we shouldn't just dismiss it. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, not the end, but the beginning. The fear of God is where we begin to acknowledge that I need to take God seriously. I live in the phenomenon of being that is created by God, and I can't make sense of my own existence without acknowledging God. That's taking God seriously. And we begin to understand that that life is filled with consequences, that really in its simplest form, these two laws, love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself, that will put you in the right direction. If you go against love, eventually it's going to hurt you. And acknowledging that is important. I don't know if you can see it. If people are watching this, you see perhaps back there, there's a wood stove back there. I love my wood stove. Just, done with that season, but I love sitting down here in the winter and stoking that thing and getting it really hot. And this is where I like to write. But I have 8 grandchildren, and some of them are still quite young. And they'll come over here. They'll come see their papa. That's what they call me. And so I give them a law. I say, thou shalt not touch the stove. Thou shalt not touch the stove. Now, where does that come from? It comes from love, right? But let's say one of them, violates Papa's law and they touch the stove and then they get burned. I could see them, if they were poor theologians, saying, oh, I understand what happened here. I violated my Papa's sovereignty. He told me not to touch that, and I did. And so I violated his sovereignty, and then in his wrath, he burned my hand. You see, all those things kind of happened, but the child would have reached the wrong conclusion. Wood-burning stoves are actually a good thing. The warmth of it's good. You just have to relate to them properly. And because I'm a wise and loving grandfather, I say, thou shalt not touch it. If they do touch it, there's consequences, but it doesn't come from, I'm not mad. There's no wrath in my heart toward any of my grandchildren if they disobey me and touch the stove. They'll get burned, but it's not because of my wrath. It's because it's the way it is. that wood-burning stoves are good, but you have to relate to them properly. All right. So life and existence and being is good, but you have to relate to it properly or you get burned. And that's the wrath of God.